Hey, you guys, this is your Impact Knockouts World Champion, Mickey James, and you are listening to Count It Out with Mike and Tyler.
I'm back, and I'm better than ever. Got a knack for making things better. Face facts, 'cause your opinion don't matter. This a maniac is gonna step on whomever.
Well, we are live, pals, and welcome to what I think is the biggest edition of Count It Out with Mike and Tyler possible. That is the Bill Apter sealed and approved Count It Out with Mike and Tyler, of course. My name is Tyler, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only Mike. And today, our guest is one of the most influential men in all of professional wrestling. Many say the man responsible for ushering in the Monday Night War. He is a WWE Hall of Famer, host of the 83-Week Podcast. His new book, Grateful, is available now for pre-order at bischoffbooks.com. And if you listened to our show last week with Ernest the Cat Miller, you know he's one hell of a badass karate black belt. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show the one and only Eric Bischoff. Mr. Bischoff, how are you today?
I am doing very well, gentlemen. Glad to be with you.
Perfect. And, you know, Mr. Bischoff, we've got you returning to the Toronto area coming up on October the 30th. 7 p.m. CWF presents Resolution at the Meridian Center in St. Catharines, Ontario. It's a loaded show. We got yourself on there, guys like Rob Van Dam, Impact Wrestling Champion Josh Alexander, Minoru Suzuki. How excited are you to come back over and see all the great fans over here in Canada?
I'm very excited. You know, I've said for decades now that I think fans in Canada, for whatever reason, are some of the best fans in the world. You know, I think fans in the UK, fans in Canada, yeah, they might compete neck and neck for that honor, but it's always great to come back to Canada. I've had some amazing memories. I had a great match in Montreal with, well, not necessarily a great match, but a great experience with Stone Cold Steve Austin in Montreal. I've never been to Toronto where it wasn't an overwhelming crowd response, and I just look forward to getting back to the area. It's been a couple of years for me now.
Well, I want to jump right to that. I'm glad you brought that up, Toronto. That's my first question for you. I mean, you were responsible for bringing Nitro to Toronto for the first time in 1999. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was the first time WCW had worked the territory in probably since 1990. So I think fans were really ready for some WCW by 1999. And I got to tell you, people can say what they want about Bret Hart and WCW, but that particular episode of Nitro had one of my favorite moments in Nitro history with the Bret Hart Goldberg standoff and Bret Hart quitting and everything like that. Do you have any, I know you've been through 1,000 million shows in your life, but do you have any memories of that particular night, that first night in Toronto, how it made you feel, the reception, and that angle with Bret and Goldberg?
Well, it was a great angle, and that was, you know, Bret Hart's idea, and it was a great idea, and the crowd reacted, you know, extremely well to it. My memory, though, is more about the reception from the audience and the fans, because as you pointed out correctly, it was really one of the first times Nitro had been in Toronto, and even WCW, for that matter, didn't really have a lot of experience in Canada. It was very difficult for us to produce television in Canada, very, very expensive for us to produce television in Canada. And Canada has some of the strictest immigration laws in the world, much more strict than the United States, for example. And, you know, we had, you know, any number of people either on our staff or on our talent roster that had, you know, DUIs or other incidents, you know, in the past that prevented them from coming to Canada. You know, so you have that issue as far as talent being able to, and production being able to get into the country. And Canada has some great laws, and they're designed to protect, you know, the Canadian arts and entertainment. But at least back then, I don't know what it's like now, but Canada had some very strict guidelines. about the percentage of the people on the show, either behind the scenes or on camera, had to be Canadians. And I'm not at all. I think it's a great idea, by the way. You have to kind of protect your own industry, but that made it difficult and expensive. So for all of those reasons, WCW didn't really spend a lot of time in Canada. But this was one effort that we made because we felt like, you know, Canada in general, but Toronto in particular and Montreal were two major markets that we had to find a way to have a presence in. And that event that you're talking about was one of our first ones, especially with Nitro. And the crowd reaction was just phenomenal. It was great. It was a great night.
And as a couple of Canadian boys over here, we could always tell that you loved us, Eric, because we knew that you could do a hell of a rendition of "O Canada," as we heard you do on Nitro that one episode.
Well, listen, you know, I'm glad you guys said that, and I hope, you know, and I know, I don't hope, I know, you know, Canadians have a great sense of humor, and I've spent a lot of time, you know, making fun of Canada as a character, as part of a storyline. And sometimes even in my comments, I have fun because Canadians are, it's really interesting. And this is my observation from, you know, as an American, but I think most of the Canadians I've worked with are so proud to be Canadian. Mm-hmm. It's like that loyalty to their country and to their flag and to their culture is far stronger than most Americans' relationship with their flag and their culture and their country. So I've often have fun, you know, at sometimes at others' expense, but I admire the fact that Canadians are so loyal to their country and to their culture, despite the fact that I have a ton of fun with them.
We love hearing it too. We love hearing it too. I want to shift gears for a moment here. I'd love to talk to you about your new book a little bit here. Grateful, a little bit different of a name from your prior book, Controversy Creates Cash. How was the experience writing this book compared to the first one, and just kind of the overall experience of the difficulties maybe writing a second book after a successful first one?
That's a great question. My first book, Controversy Creates Cash, first of all, I didn't think that I had a book in me. You know, I was surprised when I was approached by WWE and they asked me, hey, would you be interested in writing a book? And I thought, well, what the hell would I have to say? I mean, everybody knows everything already. What is there to talk about? Rehash a bunch of old stuff, right? So I was hesitant just because I didn't really think I had anything worthwhile to say. But during the process and working with a writer who did a lot of research, it became apparent to me that there's a lot of things that I just forgot about during that period of time because so much happened. You know, it's just like I sometimes describe it as being on a treadmill and you got yourself up to like 12 miles an hour, which is a ridiculous speed. But, you know, you get that thing on the height, you're doing everything you can to keep up on that treadmill and you just quit paying attention sometimes to the things around you. And as a result, I ended up forgetting about so many things. So during the first book, because the guy that wrote the book with me, Jeremy Roberts, did such a great job in research, it's like, wow, I forgot all about that. Oh, yeah, I remember that. And it was kind of a fun journey back, you know, and reliving a lot of those experiences. And in the process, I kind of realized just how significant that Monday Night War era was, not only for WCW, but for WWE as well, and for the wrestling audience in general around the world, because a lot of great things happened as a result of the Monday Night Wars. I think the product elevated in a major way. It became a big part of pop culture, and internationally we became more, I mean WWE and WCW became much more popular and experienced a lot of growth. But it's easy to forget about all the good stuff when you're constantly bombarded with all the negative stuff, you know, that also happened during that time. So writing that book was a really fun experience for me. The second book, though, this book, Grateful, it's about wrestling. And it really picks up where Controversy Creates Cash left off. Controversy Creates Cash left off, I think, in 2006, right? And I thought, okay, I'm done. You know, I've had a great run here in WWE. I've had a tremendous experience. I've made some great friends. I've got some really positive professional relationships that I valued, and I was ready to go. I was done. You know, I realized that my character had kind of played itself out in WWE by 2006. You know, the evil Eric general manager had we'd done just about everything we could do with that, really. And it was time. And I thought, okay, this is a great way to end my wrestling career, because I went into WWE with the sole intention of having a positive experience for my last experience, meaning WCW didn't end well, right? It's not the way I wanted to end my wrestling career. And I thought, well, working with WWE as a talent, not to sound like an arrogant, conceited prick, but I'm pretty good on camera, and I knew it. And I thought, this is a great way for me to end my career. I mean, if I get to write my last chapter, what a great way to write the last chapter of my wrestling career, working on the biggest stage on the planet, WWE, working with some of the biggest names in the industry, people that I had never worked before, and doing what I'm actually pretty good at. I thought, man, this is a great opportunity. So when it was done, I was very grateful, no pun intended. And I look back at it very positively, but I really thought wrestling was in my rearview mirror. And then, you know, lo and behold, a couple of years later, here I am back in the wrestling business again. And there's a lot of ground to cover between 2006 and 2022 in terms of wrestling. You know, my TNA experience, going back to WWE as an executive for a brief period of time. There's still a lot of things to talk about wrestling wise, but that's not really what the book is about. We cover all of that, right? But it's more of a backdrop. It's not the focus. The focus was really on where I'm at in my life and how I now look at my experience over really the last, since 2006, right? 16 years. But the last 5 years have really had the most impact on me in terms of the way I look at my career and look back at my time in wrestling, because it's changed my life in a lot of ways. It's made me a better person. I've really learned, I guess, partly because I've gotten older, and I guess by default, a little wiser. I look at things differently now than I did back then. You know, wrestling was it was my business. It's what I did for a living. It was very much, it was transactional. I didn't think about it really in any other way. But over the last 5 or 6 years, as I'm making appearances and meeting people like you guys, and, you know, I'm coming, you know, to Toronto area soon, I meet a lot of people, and I've heard so many people tell me how professional wrestling in general, not necessarily Nitro or NWO, but just the wrestling business has had such a positive impact on so many people. Bonding relationships between parents and children and grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins and friends. And I've heard so many of those stories that it's made me more grateful, hence the title of the book, for that experience. And the book really, I focus on a lot of those moments and experiences and how they've affected me, especially over the last 5 or 6 years.
You know, I love that. I love hearing that. It's so true. You know, for me, my great grandfather, that's my childhood memories, sitting on his lap and watching Hulk Hogan and whoever. Right? Is it nice for you to get to go out and do these appearances in person? You know, kind of get away from the toxicity on social media, the Twitters and the negativity, and get to hear these positive stories. Like that's got to be nice, right?
Yeah. In fact, in one of the opening chapters of the book, and I won't go into the whole chapter, but about 5 or 6 years ago, this is kind of a big moment for me because, and I'm just going to be really honest with you guys, you know, I've made a fortune. I've made millions and millions and millions of dollars in a wrestling. Well, maybe not millions and millions and millions, but millions and millions for sure. I've made a lot of money in the wrestling business. I've actually made more money outside of the wrestling business than I ever have inside the wrestling business, because I'm an entrepreneur, or as an entrepreneur. But as an entrepreneur, I've also taken some pretty hard shots. Being an entrepreneur is a risky way to make a living. Let's put it that way. The highs are really high and the excitement is very exciting, but there's some lows in there too. And over the last 6 or 7 years, man, I won't say I hit rock bottom. I mean, financially, my health and my family and all that has always been intact, but financially, I've had to struggle. Back 6, 7 years ago, I was struggling, and I made some investments that just didn't work out the way I had hoped. And that's the nature of being an entrepreneur. But I used to go to these events like the one you're having, and I resented the fact that I had to do them because financially it was important to me at that time. And because I had to do them, I was frustrated with myself. I actually resented myself for putting myself in a position where I had to go do these independent shows or autograph signings and things like that. Until I met this young lady by the name of Amanda about, I don't even know how long ago it was now. I'll keep saying 5 or 6 years ago. But I went to a Comic-Con in Phoenix, and I was a moderator. I was on stage with Hulk Hogan and Sting. And it was a Q&A environment. And there was 1,000 or 1,500 people in this. It was a big thing. And this young lady stood up in the back. And I could barely see her. She was so far back, and it was kind of dark. But she told me this story about her and her father and how he worked a lot, and there was stress and there were issues in the family, and it wasn't necessarily a great environment for a young girl. But the one time when her father was home, because he worked multiple jobs and things like that, but he had Monday nights off, and Monday night was daddy-daughter time. That was the only time she really got to spend like one-on-one time with her father. And they loved Nitro. And her dad loved the NWO. And she told me that story, and it touched me. And then she told me that her father had passed away and how much seeing us all on stage, Hulk and myself and Sting, really meant to her. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, this young lady was able to track down my wife and sent my wife an email and basically explained the same story, but also included the fact that her father had passed away and her mother was no longer with us, and she didn't really have much family, and she was getting married. And she asked Lori to ask me, my wife Lori, if I would walk her down the aisle in place of her father.
Wow.
I still get teared up talking about it because it touched me a lot. Give me a second. So I did. And that was the moment that I went, man, I'm looking at this shit all wrong. I'm looking at these appearances as something I have to do because of a situation I put myself in. But it's really a gift. It's really a gift. And that young lady changed the way I look at doing appearances. I no longer have to do appearances. Things have turned around, as they've always have in my life. It's like, you know, I finally got to the point now where, you know, everything is good financially. We're safe, sound, secure, all that. But I still love doing these events because now I look at them differently. And when I go to these events and meet people, if you were to sit at my booth, for example, at an autograph signing, I'm asking all the questions because people come up and they're shy or they're nervous or don't quite know what to ask or whatever. They don't want to embarrass themselves and by asking a question that's already been asked or something like that. So people are generally very respectful, but hesitant. And I just open them up. I start asking them questions and engage them in conversations and just watching people light up because now you're paying attention. You're not just signing an autograph saying, oh, thank you for coming by. Here's your autograph. See you next. I don't do that.
Yeah.
I can't spend 20 minutes talking to each person, but I look them in the eye and I ask them questions.
Yeah.
I want to know about their life. I want to know how long they've been watching wrestling. I want to know about their experiences. I want to know who they enjoy watching the most and why. I engage them. And I'm so grateful for that it was a big inspiration for the book because I talk about these things a lot, like on my podcast. I reference things like this. And Guy Owens, who wrote the Nitro book, which you guys may be familiar with, reached out to me one day and said, man, I listened to your podcast and you have so many interesting things to say that people probably don't expect to hear from you. because of the nature of your character. Because I think you should write a book. And it's kind of like the same thing in WWE. I'm like, oh man, I don't know if a book. Man, I can sit down and do a podcast for an hour, but I don't know about a book. He said, no, let's talk about it. And we did. And it was such a fun process.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how people are going to take it. I'm not trying to be a self-help person, because I'm not. I struggle every day with my own shit. Certainly don't have enough experience or talent to help people with theirs. But I think by sharing a positive perspective and talking about the positive things and how it's affected my life, and how now I look back at my wrestling career, not just as a transaction, not just as a business, but I got to help make some people's lives just a little bit better, even if it's just the relationship with their friends or their family or something to do on a Monday night. It's a gift, man. And I'm happy to share it.
Absolutely. And I can tell you firsthand, as a wrestling fan my whole life, and I will always be a wrestling fan, going to these conventions and meeting people, I've had my not so great experiences, and we remember that stuff that you say. Just asking us a simple question, that's a lifelong memory for people like us, and we cherish that stuff. So I appreciate that, and I love hearing that story.
It's so much fun. It's just so I could go on. I mean, and that's what the book's for. I mean, there's probably 12 or 13 chapters of examples of how, especially the last 5 or 6 years, have changed my outlook in a way that I think it's made me a healthier person mentally and emotionally. It's just, I'm just grateful for every day. I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is thank God for the fact that I'm opening my eyes and drawing a breath and looking around and all the things that I'm surrounded with that I love so much, including my wife of 38 years now. We've been together for 40.
Wow.
And I'm just, I guess I'm so grateful. It's almost obnoxious.
That's great. And that's at bischoffbooks.com, everybody. The pre-orders are available now, and I believe you're signing those. There's an option for signed pre-orders. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's bischoffbook.com.
Oh, sorry.
And that's okay. And yes, if you pre-order now, both Guy Evans and I will sign the book. But there's something else I don't want to forget to mention this, because it's really unique. I think we're going to make publishing history. This book may be a collector's item. Not like the Guggenheim Bible, not that level, right?
Okay.
But this will be the first time that I'm aware of, at least, that a book has been published where there is a QR code at the end of every chapter. And the reader will be able to take a snapshot of that QR code, and it will take them to an exclusive interview at the end of that chapter about a person that was the subject of that chapter. So if I'm talking about Amanda, for example, you're going to be able to hear from Amanda, her perspective on the chapter. It's never been done before.
That's very innovative. May I ask whose idea was that? Was that all you?
It was not my idea, actually. It was a friend of mine who's also an author. He's writing a book currently called A Six Pack. I'll talk more about it when the time comes. His name is Brad Blajukian. And Brad said, now he's got a traditional publisher, and they're not really interested in doing the QR code, but it was his idea, and he was telling me about it. I said, Brad, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Because I wish I could do it. I said, well, let me ask you a question. I would never steal your idea, but would you mind if I use that opportunity in my book? And he said, please do, because it will hopefully open up some eyes. But it will be the first book that I'm aware of ever published that allows you to access additional media beyond the physical book. And I think that's a pretty cool thing.
That's fantastic. Absolutely.
Well, you're just proving my point. And thank you for bringing up the fact that you're an entrepreneur, because I was dying for an idea for a segue to my next question. I couldn't get there, but you brought me there yourself. Thank you for doing my job for me. My question, I got to talk about you being an entrepreneur, because you're right. You were a great on-screen talent. You were one of my favorite wrestling personalities as a teenager in my 20s. But above all that, you are a business mastermind. People know this about you, not only in wrestling, in TV production, out all over the place. You have a mind for business. So with that mind that you have for business in general, I have to ask you, what's it like for you right now to have this like front row seat watching what Conrad Thompson is doing to the podcast business and outwards? I mean, he took this one podcast he started with Ric Flair how many years ago, and now he's got this whole network, Starcast. He did this big pay-per-view with Jim Crockett Promotions. God knows where that's going to come from there. Like what else he can do with that. Do you ever pick his brain? Do you give him advice? Does he ask you for advice? What's your relationship with Conrad like, and what's it like seeing his empire explode like this?
It's just it's again, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to start a church or anything, but it's a blessing. It's one of the things that I'm grateful for. It's been a big part of the last 5 or 6 years of my life. It's funny, if you go back and listen to one of my, like the first 2 or 3 podcasts I did with Conrad, they absolutely sucked. They were horrible. And it was because I was very defensive. I went into it defensive, and, Conrad came across a little bit like a prosecutor, and I was being cross-examined on a witness, in court. So it made me even more defensive. The first 2 or 3 were like, they really sucked. But I realized afterwards, I listened to it, I go, man, this is never going to work. Something has to change. And I realized that what had to change was me. As long as I was going to be defensive, it wasn't going to be entertaining to listen to. I wasn't having any fun because I was defensive. If he throws a shot, I'm going to counterpunch. That's not a great way to do a podcast. So when that light bulb went off in my head, I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to have fun with this. I'm just going to, I screwed some shit up. I'm going to have fun talking about it. I'm going to keep it all in perspective, but I'm not going to be defensive about anything anymore. And as soon as that light bulb went off in my head, I started having a blast. And the more fun I had, the more popular the podcast became. And I went, all right, so that was a big moment for me, to learn how to talk about the good and the bad without being defensive about the bad. I can have as much fun talking about the mistakes I've made or the choices I've made. I don't necessarily call them mistakes necessarily, but choices I've made that didn't work out. I have as much fun talking about that stuff as I do talking about the stuff that worked. Sometimes more, actually. That was a big deal, and that was because of Conrad. And I work pretty closely, to answer your question more directly, I work pretty closely with Conrad on a lot of the things that are going on within the network. And we talk 2 or 3 times a week and probably exchange 3 or 4 times as many texts or emails during the course of the week. So I'm not driving it. That's all Conrad and his team, but I'm a part of it enough to enjoy the experience. I love being in the back seat. I don't need to drive anymore. I've been driving for a long time. I just appreciate an opportunity to be along for the ride.
Do you think that he's kind of stumbled onto something with the idea of the Ric Flair last match? Or, could we maybe see that as a yearly thing with maybe Kurt Angle's last match next year? Or do you think that this event only worked because it is Ric Flair and Ric Flair is Ric Flair? You know what I mean?
No, I think you're going to see more of that type of an event. The challenge is always going to be, Rick's an exception. Always has been. What is he, 73 years old? Come on now. A lot of the guys that are, Rick's peers in the wrestling business, for example, Hulk Hogan can't have a last match. He would want to, I think, if physically he was able to. In fact, physically, if he was able to, I think you'd have a hard time keeping him from having a match or an experience like Ric Flair did. But he's busted up. And he knows that. And I think there's a lot of people that we would love to have one last match with that kind of fall into that category.
Yeah.
So that being said, that's a challenge, but I do know there's discussions going on right now with some great potential last match candidates that will carry that promotion forward for a long time.
Oh, that's exciting to hear for sure. And we kept talking about earlier our childhoods and these memories and moments that we have. And the first moment I remember seeing you was on a AWA Best of the Decades VHS. You were the host for it. And we've come a long way, and the business has evolved a long way since that. And I love hearing your take on the current product. And I wouldn't mind just asking a couple questions about some things that are going on in the modern world of wrestling right now. The first big one, it's been almost 2 months since Vince McMahon stepped down, and we've got this new regime taking over in the WWE. How do you think they've been doing the first couple months? Do you think that things are working for them? Just kind of love to hear your take on that.
I am so impressed with, number one, how seamless the transition has been. I think a lot of people, including people in the financial markets, who look at WWE as an investment, for years now, the one big concern about WWE from an investment standpoint as a stock is, what happens when Vince McMahon leaves? Who's going to take, there's nobody there to take his place, which was silly. And you look at how seamless this transition has been with Stephanie McMahon as CEO, co-CEO, and now Paul Levesque and as the chief content officer, head of creative, whatever you want to call it. Just the seamlessness, the ease of transition has been really impressive. And I think it's important for wrestling fans to, regardless of how you feel about Vince McMahon over the years, or even as a result of some of the controversy that we're hearing about, you have to be impressed with a man who has built up a company, a public company, that's worth $5 billion or more right now, be able to do it and walk away from it and have that company operating on all 8 cylinders with a seamless transition. That speaks a lot to the company that Vince built. He put the right people in the right positions. He surrounded himself with the highest caliber people he could find in their respective positions within the corporation. Nick Khan is a perfect example. Who better to be a co-CEO than a guy who is president of CAA, which is one of the largest entertainment agencies in the world, with probably as much or more influence than any single person. That's a guy you want on your team. So you got to hand it to Vince. But I think Paul has done a phenomenal job. The interest in the product, the quality of the product speaks for itself. My opinion doesn't fucking matter. The quality of the product and the results thus far really speaks volumes for the job that Paul is doing. And my opinion doesn't really matter. But I applaud him. I really support him. I think he's doing it. I don't have a personal relationship with Paul. I mean, we know each other, obviously, and have worked with each other off and on. But as someone who's kind of watching the business side of the business, I think he's doing a phenomenal job. And I am assuming Stephanie is as well. We get to see the results of Paul's work every Monday and Friday. We don't really necessarily see what Stephanie's doing behind the scenes. But I can't think of 2 better people right now to be in the position they're in.
Absolutely. If we can get you to put your fan cap on for a minute here, and from a fan's perspective, we've been watching Roman Reigns take over as this world champion now. He's over 740 days. Who do you think on that roster, maybe put your fan/writer cap on a bit here. Is there somebody that you could see on that roster that you think would be the right guy to take that belt from him? And when do you know, like, if you're writing this and you've had some incredible champions that you've wrote for and booked for, when do you know that time is right to make that switch?
You read the crowd. You feel it. Wrestling isn't science, it's art. And art requires instinct and feel. If it was science, it would be easy and everybody would be doing it. It wouldn't really matter. It's a great thing about art, whether it's music or opera. I guess opera's music, or stage plays. or movies or television or even this, what we're doing right now. It's telling stories, right? It's engaging the audience. It's art. It's not science. And I think with regard as to when you make a move and start thinking about a transition into another superstar, that's all reading the audience, man. The audience will tell you when it's time. The numbers don't lie. You know, the numbers will tell you, and you just have to balance the data, the information that you get every day, every week on television with your gut and your instinct and your feel for the audience. As far as who would be next, I don't know, man. Number one, I don't know the roster well enough to really do a credible job of suggesting somebody. But if you go to an extreme, he's not ready yet. He's not ready yet. But Braun Breaker is a guy that I think within the next few years is going to be either in that position or damn close to it. There's a lot of great talent. Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens has been floating around the top for a long time. He's a believable character. He's a great guy. And he's a good representative of the company. Could he carry it for as long as, Roman? I don't know. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. It shouldn't be the standard, right? Kevin is a guy that the audience can get behind. They believe in him. He's relatable, and he's good, and he's a great representative of the company. But I'm sure there are a handful of other people that probably fall into that same category that I'm just not as familiar.
Absolutely.
Now, I got to say, I personally believe that we are in one of the greatest eras of professional wrestling, because never in my lifetime have we had so much choice. We have a bunch of major products, but we also have so much grasp on the indies and stuff like that. There's nothing we can't get our hands on as fans. Right now, my personal favorite product is Impact. I am absolutely in love with everything Impact has done weekly since 2018-19. I'm not sure if you're familiar at all with what they're doing, but my question for you is, if you talk to anybody who's watching it, I promise you, they're going to tell you they're doing awesome, awesome things with awesome, awesome talent. Yet they still can't get up there anymore. They can't break to that next level. As a businessman, as somebody who's done it with other companies, a man who's been in Impact, is there any advice you would give, like to get Impact to punch through that next level? Is it possible, or have they kind of made their bed with their past mistakes?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think their past mistakes have anything to do with their future. I mean, hopefully they learn from those mistakes, and therefore they're good. It's an investment in a way. If it's something that you can, look back on and use as a resource in terms of what not to do. I don't know. Their mistakes or whatever happened in the past isn't the issue. The issue is they're the tree that falls in the forest every week and nobody hears it.
That's it, right?
They're on a network that almost doesn't exist, at least here in the States. I mean, I know it does, but you would need an engineer to find it. In a lot of markets, it doesn't exist. The time period's not great. And look, the product, even though the product in the ring, there's a lot of great talent there. So none of what I'm saying is a reflection of the talent or even the creative necessarily, because I really don't watch enough of it to make a comment that's fair. However, I have dropped in, and in order for any company to break through to that next level and to position themselves in the same conversation, for example, as AEW, you've got to be on a major network.
Right.
You've got to have 3,000-4,000 people at ringside, because that's credibility. When I turn on television, and I have dropped in on Impact from time to time, and I see that small studio show with hardly any crowd, it's just not credible as an entertainment property. Nothing to do with the quality of the product in the ring or even the creative. It's just not going to capture the imagination of the viewer. It's not.
Yeah.
So the question is, if Impact wanted to compete with AEW, what do they need to do? I don't know. Invest the amount of money that Tony Khan has invested to get his show on a major network, bring in some major talent, not as many as, Tony's brought in too many talents, but bring in a couple big names as your anchors that everybody knows, that has a lot of Q, recognizable by the audience, and then build around them on a major network, and then expect to lose some money for a while because it costs a lot of money to go to those big arenas and to attract 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people. It's a big investment, and you're not going to recoup it overnight. It's a 3-year or a 5-year plan. That's what it's going to take.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Tyler, if you don't mind, I'm going to get my fanboy question out of the way so that you can ask your last couple questions and take her home. But and this is strictly a fanboy question, Eric. This is me talking through the 20-year-old who watched the product 20 years ago, seeing you on Raw. You were one of my favorite characters on Raw for a long time. The general manager character was one of the reasons to tune in every week. But one of the things I love about professional wrestling is the entrances, the grandeur, and I love the music. Your theme song was one of my favorites of all time. To this day, I loved that theme song. So I got to ask you, before you came in on that very shocking day, did you sit down with Jim Johnson? Did he play you the track? Did you have any input? Did you like the song?
Zero input. In fact, when I made my first appearance, the very first appearance, the music that they used was Back in Black by AC/DC.
That's right. Yeah.
They licensed it for one time only. And then the following week is when I heard the I'm Back theme. Right. But when I walked out, that was the first time I heard it.
Oh, no way.
I heard it for the very first time along with everybody else that was watching. So I had no input into that, but really, really dug the music. And I hear a lot of people say the same thing.
That's awesome. I'll ask the last couple questions real quick here, Eric. You've been so great with your time. We really
hey, I'm in no hurry. So if you guys got more questions, I don't want to cut you short. So don't worry about it.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. You did bring up AEW. And I'm not going to sit here and beat a dead horse. I don't want to talk about the press conference and the CM Punk and the fight. And
thank goodness
we've heard your opinion on it, and we've heard everybody's opinion on it. But the problem that I find with all that is nobody's been talking about a guy that I've heard you speak very highly of, and that's MJF. This night was his big return. Everything kind of got overshadowed. I know you're a big fan of his work. Do you think it's kind of ballsy for AEW to let him go out on TV and talk about becoming a free agent and I could go to see my boy, the other con? And would you ever let one of your talents go out there and talk like that unless you already had them signed up for a long-term deal? Because that could make them look pretty egg in the face in the long run if he does leave them, right?
Well, look, here's what we don't know. Here's what I don't know. I don't know if when MJF came back recently, did he come back under a new contract?
Fair.
Is 2024 just a storyline now? Because MJF is, for example, under contract to 2026. I mean, he came back. MJF came back. He came back for a reason. I'm assuming the reason was he and Tony sat down and figured out a deal that made MJF happy. So we don't know what that deal is. And maybe there wasn't an extension. I don't know. It's hard to comment on things we don't know about, right? That's what Dave Meltzer and people do that all the time. They just make stuff up and try to make it sound like they know something they don't. I don't know. Here's what I do know, though. Regardless of whether or not I had MJF signed, if I'm Tony Khan, for the next 5 years or not, I would not have had him come out and cut that promo on that night. I understand that they needed to continue where they left off with MJF's character. I do understand that. And I think it would have been appropriate to address it somehow creatively the following week or even the week after that. But coming off of that nuclear disaster of a media experience and how badly CM Punk just destroyed Tony Khan's credibility, AEW's credibility. I mean, he really shit all over the company, shit all over Tony, and not in a way that is normally designed to create interest or lead to a match or something. It was just, I was embarrassed for Tony. I felt bad for Tony, and I still do, because it just happened a couple months earlier with MJF. MJF did the same thing.
But that's where I got to ask a question. How much longer can you feel sorry for the man? I mentioned this in the show last week. At what point does it stop being, okay, I feel sorry for him, and does it start being, he has to, I can't have sympathy for someone who lets this shit happen to himself.
Well, and that was kind of my point, is we're there now.
Yeah.
And we're absolutely there, which is why I wouldn't have had MJF come out in the opening segment of that show, come out and basically shit all over AEW again. Not after what had just happened the night before, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't understand. Look, I like MJF as a person. We've spent a little bit of time together, and I enjoy, I mean, I don't know him really well. We don't hang out, all that, but I've been around him enough and talked to him enough, and we communicate occasionally, texts or DMs or whatever. I think he's a phenomenal performer. I think we're just beginning to see what he's going to become. I think he's got an extremely bright future. I just question whether or not it made sense for him to come out and shit all over Tony Khan and AEW after they had been shit upon as much as they had the night before. I think the timing was wrong.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, the last question I'll ask, Eric, we always like to end things on the highest notes that we can. You know, you've had such an incredible career. I really love looking back at your time on the WWE, and something you said earlier. It really showed the amount of fun that you were able to have out there, whether you were doing the GM stuff with Steve Austin, whether you were being the most hated man in the ECW crowd. Do you have like any certain moments that you look back on and it just makes you smile? Maybe it's just a personal moment for you. It doesn't have to be a big angle, but just like a couple of moments that you just can look back out of everything you've done and just put a smile on your face. And so that was cool.
Yeah. I mean, working with Steve Austin was the most fun that I've ever had as a talent ever, including the NWO and everything else that I did. As a performer, that opportunity in working with Steve is light years ahead of any other positive experience I've had. And I've had a lot of them. Don't get me wrong. It's hard. Had a lot of them. But the one scene that I did with the Chuck and Billy wedding where I played the old minister, as a performer, that one scene is something that every time somebody sends me a clip, because it happens frequently.
Yeah.
Every time somebody sends me a clip, I watch it. And every time I watch it, I giggle. I just like I am now. I just like, that was so much fun. It was so much fun. It was
I don't like where this is going. I told you, Tyler, if Eric told us we only had 3 minutes left in the show for us to fucking run, I don't like where this is going.
Is it true that the boys didn't even know that was you in the back? Did you have some fun with the boys?
Nobody knew.
Oh, that's
nobody
incredible.
knew. Nobody knew. In fact, I'll tell you one really quick story. There's a guy by the name of Brad Riggins. Brad Riggins from Minnesota. I've known him since high school. He was the captain of his high school wrestling team. And I wasn't a captain. I was on a wrestling team for another school. And we would meet each other. Our schools would meet in state and regional tournaments every year. And Brad Riggins was a stud. You know, I think he was 180 pounds. He might've been a heavyweight, but he was the king of the hill. And we knew each other. We weren't friends in high school, but we knew each other through amateur wrestling. And then I got to work with Brad, and Brad went on to become a professional. He worked for the AWA, for a long time. He worked in WWE for a brief period of time as a talent, but Brad was also hired by New Japan Pro Wrestling to kind of manage American talent that were going over to Japan on a regular basis. Anyway, so I had become great friends with Brad and had known him since high school, since I was 16, right? So anyway, we're doing the scene that we're talking about with the Chuck and Billy wedding was taking place in Minneapolis. So I ended up getting to the arena like at 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. Rest of the talent didn't start showing up until noon, but they wanted me to get in makeup before anybody else got there so that nobody knew it was me. The reveal was that was the moment. And they meaning WWE, didn't want anybody to know it was me. So I got to the arena early, 3 or 4 hours in makeup. I finally come out of makeup and I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm thinking, oh, this is awesome. So I started trying to get into the character early, right? I had never done anything like that before. So I'm thinking, all right, I've got to make myself believe I'm an old man. So I started walking around backstage and my hand up, kind of shaking, and people would say hi to me, and I'd say, good morning. And I did that all day because I really wanted to be that character. I tried. So at some point in the afternoon, I look over and there's Brad Riggins, who I've known since I was 16, standing in a corner because he came to visit. Now, as guys that used to be in the business often do, they come backstage and say hi to old friends and things like that. So I see Brad Riggins backstage, and he's with his 2 stepdaughters. One was like about 9, the other one was maybe 12. And they're just standing there, not talking to anybody. And I go over to them, in character, and I walked up to Brad, hello, young man. What's your name? And I shook hands with him, and he didn't know how to act, and I looked over at one of his daughters and I did a Joe Biden. I smelled her hair. I went, you smell lovely, young lady.
Holy shit.
I have some candy in my dressing room. Would you care to join me? I said this right in front of Brad. And Brad is Brad is, everybody talks about Kurt Angle and they talk about Brock Lesnar and they talk about this guy, that guy. Brad Riggins was that guy, in his era. He was that guy. He made the Olympic wrestling team, for crying out loud. He's that guy. But I knew, I was like, he thought I was 80, so he wasn't going to beat me up. Right. So I figured I'm just going to take this as far as I can just to see what happens. And I'm sniffing her hair. Finally, Brad says, okay, well, we got to go. Goodbye. Don't forget. Come back to see. So later on, that night, now, of course, Brad's in the audience, right? He thinks it's some perverted old minister that's hitting on his 12-year-old daughter, trying to take her to his dressing room and give her a cookie or whatever. And now I'm up on the stage and I reveal myself. I saw Brad backstage and he was like, you son of a bitch. You son of a bitch. I wanted to kill you.
Oh, my God.
That was fun.
That is single-handedly.
I did the same thing to Eddie because Eddie's kind of a hothead and I knew it. So I thought, I'm going to go fuck with Eddie. It was awesome.
That out of what are we at, Tyler? 150 shows almost now.
Give or take.
That is without a doubt the best story that's ever been told on this show.
Absolutely. I can't, Mike. I can't think of a better time for us to take it home on that. Mr. Bischoff, thank you so much. Mike, do you want to go ahead and take us home?
Oh man, on behalf of the hardest I've ever laughed on this show in 3 years, thank you so much, Mr. Bischoff. We cannot thank you enough for being here.
My pleasure.
We have been counted out.